And welcome to a special edition of COS Live. I'm your host, Rita Peters. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And I'll tell you what's happening today is that in just a few moments, we're expecting debate to begin in the Kansas House of Representatives on the Convention of States Action resolution. Now, so far, 18 states have passed our resolution, and this year it's being considered by an additional 20 states, including Kansas. So, how did we get here? As always, it starts with we the people. The COS Kansas team has been busy building support across the state. Over 37,000 Kansans have signed the COS petition. And a recent scientific survey revealed that 2/3 of Kansas voters, that was 67% of Kansas voters, are in favor of an Article 5 convention to propose constitutional amendments that limit federal spending, limit federal power, and establish term limits for Congress and/or federal judges and bureaucrats. That is exactly what the Kansas House is about to consider in just a few minutes. We will be streaming it for you live. And, I want to add that the platform of the Kansas Republican Party supports the calling of an Article 5 Convention of States so that the states can reassert their constitutional power. That's what all of this is about. Other prominent endorsements include the former Kansas Senate President Susan Wagle and former Lieutenant Governor Tracy Mann. President Dwight Eisenhower, who was from Kansas, was also known for supporting the Article 5 convention to protect self-governance. Last year, we uncovered the historic audio of that speech. It was really exciting. And you can find that historic audio of President Eisenhower on our website. You can just barely hear the Kansas legislature. They are starting their session in the House. They have not yet called up the Convention of States resolution. Typically, they do a little bit of housekeeping before that starts. So I'm going to keep doing this introduction, and we will switch over to the live stream and let you see the visual and hear the audio as soon as they start talking about Convention of States. Now, in Kansas, we have secured a majority of state representatives who favor a convention of states in the past. However, the Kansas Constitution requires a 2/3 majority on all Article 5 legislation. That is a constitutional requirement. So it is a big hurdle, but the Kansas team has been working hard to get this done. In addition to the constitutional supermajority requirement, the legislature itself also has a rule requiring a 2/3 supermajority to pass any Article 5 application in Kansas. So I want to just give a shout out to our Kansas grassroots team. They've been working so hard and they have made amazing strides so far. Now we're expecting to get a cloture vote today, allowing the House to take up the actual resolution and sort of end filibuster. So if that happens, then the Kansas House could take up the resolution for the actual vote, which is where that 2/3 requirement kicks in. So we need a simple majority of votes to get cloture, but we need a 2/3 majority in the Kansas House in order to move the resolution forward. If that happens, then in Kansas, we would still need to cross over and go through the Senate for final passage in Kansas. So let's take a listen and see where they are. I don't think they are quite to us yet, but let's hear what they're doing in the House there.
Speaker recognizes Representative Clayton on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, appreciate your attention. We are honoring the Shawnee Mission East Boys Swim and Dive Team who captured the 6A Acacia State title. At the state meet, they had 17 swimmers and divers score points, one member of the first team All-State, two members of the second team All-State. They also broke 3 school records. On their way to the state title, they also won the Sunflower League Championship. We have the seniors here on the floor with us. Just raise your hand as I call your name. Evan Broadus, Evan Deedy, Bo Kimmel, Max Peterson, Aaron Ralston, Will Roberts, James Shipfer, Brady Smith, Carson Welch, and Max Wilson. And their teammates join them in the gallery. Special congratulations go to Coach Wiley Wright. Thank you. And please join me in honoring the 6A championships for the boys swim and dive team.
Okay, folks, so I'm going to come back and talk to you for a little longer. It looks like they're still doing some housekeeping measures in the Kansas House. But again, if you're just joining us, we are moments away from debate on Convention of States in the Kansas House of Representatives. We will be streaming that for you live right here. But until they are ready to take up the resolution, let me just give you a little bit more information. 25 states have introduced the Convention of States resolution so far this year. Those states that are still considering it include Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia is still on our written list, but West Virginia actually passed our resolution through both chambers last Friday. It was so exciting, and it was actually unprecedented for both chambers to act on the same day. In fact, within an hour of our passing in the West Virginia House, we had passed in the West Virginia Senate as well. It was quite an exciting day. So West Virginia last Friday becomes state number 18 to pass our resolution for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments that would impose fiscal restraints on Washington, limit its power and jurisdiction, and set term limits for federal officials and members of Congress. So that was number 18 last Friday. We do have other states in the running to be number 19. Could it be Kansas? Could it be South Carolina? Could it be Iowa? All are possibilities, and let's see what's going to happen today. Our producer just showed you a nice graphic that shows you the states. You can also find that on that graphic on our website. It's a sort of a progress map. There it is. Thank you, producer G. This shows you in blue where we have active legislation. The green states are states that have already passed the resolution. So those are our 18 passed states. And it looks, we still have to make West Virginia green. That is an exciting thing for us to have to do. The states that are in yellow are states where our resolution has been passed in some past year in one chamber. So maybe passed in the House, but not in the Senate, or passed in the Senate, but not yet in the House. But that gives you an idea of how much progress has been made with this effort already. So it's pretty exciting to look at that map and see how colorful it is. There's very little white on the map. We have had committee victories in 7 states so far this year: South Dakota, Massachusetts, and Iowa, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Kansas that we're watching today. We are on the House floor today in Kansas because we have already passed the Kansas House Committee on State and Local Government. So that moved us forward to the House where we are today. And of course, in West Virginia, we also have achieved committee victories this year. And this graphic shows you also where we've achieved final passage just this year. So 3 of our states have become past states for convention of states just this year. That's Wisconsin, Nebraska, and West Virginia, to put us at 18 states that have passed the resolution. We need to pass in 34 states, that's 2/3 of the states, according to Article 5 of the Constitution, in order to convene at the convention delegations from each and every state that will meet and discuss amendment proposals on the 3 topics that are outlined in our resolution. And once again, those are imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and setting term limits for federal officials. Now, our other full chamber victory was in the South Dakota House. And for those who haven't heard, the South Dakota Senate declined to vote on our resolution after the House passed it by a 39-30 margin. Although this means that our resolution won't be considered in the South Dakota legislature again until next year, our South Dakota volunteers have made tremendous progress this year. They're already pushing forward with an aggressive strategy to impact the 2022 elections and get this done next year. Other states where our resolution is effectively dead until next year include Virginia, Wyoming, which is a budget-only session this year, and New Hampshire. Elsewhere, thanks to our success in the North Carolina House in 2021, we're already halfway home in North Carolina. North Carolina has a 2-year session, and so we just need the North Carolina Senate to take final action, which could happen within the next few months. So I'm going to pause again and let's go back and watch the Kansas House. We do expect that they will be getting to our resolution relatively soon. And if anything changes, I'll come back on. But let's listen into what's happening in the Kansas House right now.
Risky the project is. And so there will now be a process to put in place by ITEC that will develop those risks, and then those risks will be determined, and then that will help us determine whether or not it goes before JCIT. So further, the bill makes some changes in Cybersecurity Act, in putting more emphasis on whether or not or putting more emphasis on having the staff have cybersecurity reviews and training. So with that, I will stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. So, see more technology uses in the future. I mean, someday it may be even possible, do you agree, to print a podium, correct? Like a 3D printer.
Probably already can.
Probably could. Do you think that maybe they could print like a little step stool for those of us that are so short that when we come up here, the whole time that we're speaking, I have to stand on my toes? I know my parents are in heaven now saying, finally, all that money we spent on dancing lessons is paying off. Because I can actually stand on my toes for quite a while up here. Thank you. This is a really good bill. The Joint Committee on Information Technology, we have been working on this for quite a while. And the speaker did a great job in explaining what is in here, but just to highlight a few things that I am particularly pleased that we were able to accomplish is that it does change the review process so that it's more of a risk-based review, and then it also inserts the legislature at the point in the RFP process where I think it makes sense, where we can actually have some instructive collaboration with the executive branch so that we make sure that our IT projects are lining up with the policies that we pass. And then the other thing it does is it updates some of the Cybersecurity Act. So Anyway, with that, I stand in support and urge your favorable vote for House Bill 2548. Thank you.
There's no further discussion. Representative Hoffman, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll see if we can't work on a stool next year. When the committee rises and reports, I move that we report House Bill 2548 favorable.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoffman to report House Bill 2548 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HCR 5027. For the purposes of carrying HCR 5027, the chair recognizes Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
May continue.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, this morning I want to explain to the Committee of the Whole the purpose of the Article 5 convention process, why it was put in the U.S. Constitution, and then address some of the concerns and objections that have been raised. Because I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Article 5 process works, and the limitations that actually do exist in both the Constitution and from the history of practice in this country on how an Article 5 convention would actually take place. First and most fundamentally, this piece of legislation is not about a particular set of policy positions. This legislation is not about Republican nor Democrat. This legislation is not about conservative or liberal. What this legislation is about is a much more fundamental question than what is our policy. It's about the question of who decides what that policy should be, and our founders would have said that was really the ultimate question. And according to our Constitution, it is we the people who decide. And in order to secure that, in order to secure those rights of the people, the founders divided power within our government. First, they divided it between the branches of the federal government, then the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches, such that each of those branches would have an incentive to take power away from the rest, so that each of those branches would check the others. In James Madison's words, such that ambition would counteract ambition. And according to James Madison, it is those checks and balances that help secure our rights. Bills of rights are parchment barriers ultimately. On paper, Venezuela has a great Bill of Rights, along with their constitution. The former Soviet Union had one too, which promised every right under the sun. And yet none of that means anything without the meaningful checks and balances in the system, in our Constitution. And that's exactly what this legislation is about today. The founders not only checked the power between the branches of the federal government, they checked power by balancing it between the federal government and the state governments. And sadly, that balance of power, which we call federalism, has been largely asleep in America for the last few years. The states have not exercised a meaningful check on the federal government. The states have not pushed back against federal overreaches of power. And the net result is we have a federal government that is much too large here today. And that's just not my opinion, it's the opinion of the majority of the American people. Over 70% of the American people believe that the federal government is too large and does too much. Of the American people believe that the federal government is too large and does too much. It also holds true regardless of whether they are Republican or Democrat and whether they live here in Kansas or on the East or West Coast. This opinion holds true across both political and geographic barriers. What Article 5 of the Constitution is designed to do is to ensure that balance of power remains in place. Article 5 gives Congress the ability to propose amendments. 2/3 of Congress can propose amendments to our Constitution, but it also gives 2/3 of the states the same ability to propose amendments to our Constitution as well. Our founders recognized when they were drafting the Constitution that Congress cannot be the only governmental body that's allowed to propose amendments. If so, we're never going to get amendments that are going to restrain the power of the federal government. If Congress becomes the problem, who are you going to go to solve the problem if Congress has the only ability to propose the amendments? That's what this provision was designed to do in the Constitution, and that's what this legislation is about here before you today. It's about having the states step up and say that we are no longer going to be treated as a regional agency of the federal government, and we are actually going to push back on the overreach of the government at the federal level. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to go ahead and address some of the objections that were raised in the committee and by those that keep sending us those emails, mostly from out of state. First and most fundamentally, it's important to recognize the distinction between the Constitutional Convention of 1787 and what is being proposed here today. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was obviously not called under Article 5 of the Constitution because Article 5 of the Constitution did not exist yet. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was not called under the Articles of Confederation because the Articles of Confederation made no such provision for any such convention. Instead, it was called under the reserved sovereign authority of the states. The states were completely sovereign at the time that our Constitution was adopted, and the Articles of Confederation recognized that they had the power to write a new Constitution. They had the power to create a new system of government, and that's ultimately what they did in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. That is not what this piece of legislation here does. If it did, I highly doubt that myself nor any of the sponsors would be supporting it, and none of the 18 states that have adopted it across the country would have adopted this resolution if that's what it did. Instead, with this legislation, it uses Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution and follows the procedures laid out to allow those states to exercise exactly the same authority and power that Congress has, the power to propose amendments, and that's what Article 5 says. It says, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, Congress shall call a convention, which shall propose amendments, which shall be valid as part of this Constitution, when ratified by legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof. The process laid out in Article 5 requires Congress to call a convention when applied by the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. As was mentioned earlier, there are currently 18 states that have adopted an application resolution. Congress has no option upon this subject, though. Congress must call a convention when 2/3 of the states apply. That is 34 states. So what is the purpose of that convention? Article 5 says that purpose of the convention is to propose amendments, and that's critically important, is to propose amendments. This convention has no power to ratify amendments. It has no power to rewrite our Constitution. It has exactly the same power that Congress has to propose amendments to our system of government. It has been said that the Convention of States is essentially a glorified drafting committee. Any amendments that it drafts have to go back to the states in order to be ratified, just as any proposals of Congress have to go back to the states to be ratified, and those provisions, those proposed amendments, must be ratified by 3/4 of the states, which is 38 states in our present government, a pretty high watermark. In fact, if you look at it a different way, from the state legislative body level, there are 99 state legislative bodies in the country. That means that 13 of those 99 bodies could stop any amendment proposal. In practical political terms, this means you're going to need both Republicans and Democrats to back any such proposal. It's also going to mean you're going to need the overwhelming support of the American people behind any amendment proposal before it can become part of our Constitution. And that's exactly as our founders intended it. It is not an easy process. Our founders, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to the provision of this country, to the birth of this country, and to the creation of our Constitution. and they did not make it easy to change that Constitution. Now it has been raised on several occasions. Well, this application seems very broad. It says, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. That seems to leave a lot on the table. And the answer is that it does leave a lot on the table because there is a lot of abuses of power by our federal government. There are abuses of power by the federal judiciary, which means we need to leave Article 3 open to amendment. There are abuses of power by the executive branch, so we need to leave Article 2 open for amendment. There are abuses by Congress, the legislative branch of government, so we need to leave Article 1 open for amendment. This application is intentionally drafted to allow the states to come together and draft proposals that address all of the overreach of the federal government, to debate and discuss and to come to an agreement on how we can impose structural restraints on the federal government. E pluribus unum, out of many one. I will note that there is an important limitation in the language. It says limit the power of the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. It is a directional limitation, which is absolutely critical. It would be absolutely inappropriate and outside the scope of this application for the legislatures for any convention to propose amendments that expanded the scope of the federal government. So, for example, taking away our Second Amendment rights, that would expand the scope of the federal government. That would not be limiting the power of the federal government, and therefore would be outside of the scope of this application. Look at the 15th Amendment or the 19th Amendment or any of the Bill of Rights or any of the constitutional provisions that secure rights to the American people. That would be absolutely unconstitutional under this piece of legislation and would be struck down as such by the courts. Mr. Chair, I think now is a good point. I should just restrain myself and be prepared to take questions.
Very good. Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Miller. Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chance to speak on this bill, or this HCR. The representative gave a more than thorough explanation of what the resolution is all about and what the intent is. We had some pretty nice discussions in committee. Some pretty high-profile people came in to speak on this resolution. There's some questions that I have that maybe we need to find out a little bit more about. So, Representative, would you please stand for a few questions? Representative, I know everybody's been getting a lot of emails on this issue. Some pro, some con. Lately, I've been getting a lot of no votes for this resolution. One of the concerns was that if the Constitution, the Article 5 is agreed upon by the state of Kansas and 34 states, that once this convention comes to order, what parts of the Constitution are off limits for this convention to address?
Thank you for the question. So what topics are outside the scope? Yes. This specific application for calling for a convention of the states is limited to 3 topics, which is presented in the bill before you, or the House concurrent resolution.
That's good enough. Thank you. So what I'm hearing you say is that the Bill of Rights and other amendments that were brought in, that the forefathers agreed upon, are off limits to this. It says fiscal restraint on the federal government, limit of power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and the limit of terms of office for members of Congress and officials. Those are all would be part of this?
Yes.
And my understanding is that some of the information that you gave, 70% of the American people are in favor of the Convention of States. Is that what I understood?
Yes, according to some historical and recent polls, yes.
And do you have dates on that data that you supplied this morning?
I can get you that, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Just based on what I understand this Convention of States is, what it can do, and some of the concerns that the people I've talked to have about opening up the Constitution, that nothing would be off limits to be involved with and maybe change. I won't be supporting this, and up to the wisdom of the people to see how much they want to change our Constitution, our level of government. You know, the states right now have pushed back against the federal government on certain issues, and they still maintain that right. And with that, Mr. Chair, I thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Miller.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
You may proceed.
I did err in my last statement. I stand against this motion. Thank you.
Now the chair re-recognizes Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me state unequivocally that I support the resolution. But I do have some questions for my friend. First set of questions relates to process, our process, and if you would yield, or if the carrier of the resolution would yield, my question is, how many votes in this chamber are required to pass this resolution?
Could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear very well back there.
Well, it wasn't you couldn't hear, someone was bothering you. My question was, how many votes in this chamber are required to adopt this resolution?
House rules provide that there needs to be a 2/3 majority in order to pass.
And House rules prevail, notwithstanding that the Kansas Constitution also says 2/3 are required. The Attorney General has opined that that requirement is precatory. Do you agree?
We will follow the 2/3 requirement under the House rules, yes.
Yeah, but I was showing off. I was trying to get you to talk about precatory. Now, the representative was kind enough to share with the body, or at least it was on my desk, I assume it was on a document labeled questions and answers. And I have some questions with regard to the answers. Oh, before I get to that, I have another process question. And that is, are you familiar with House Rule 2901 regarding the form of resolving clauses?
I have it open. Yes.
Do you see the language there that requires that resolving clauses include the language 2/3 of the members elected to the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the members elected to the Senate concurring therein as a requirement for the resolving clause? I like it when I see so many people reading the rules.
Yes, I see the clause you're referring to, yes.
And you would agree that that's required to be in today's resolution, would you not?
I don't believe that language needs to be in the resolution itself.
Well, you must be reading the rule 2901 subsection A differently than I. So suffice it to say we disagree on that, and suffice it to say that I will maintain the opinion that unless this resolution is amended, it is void as being against House rules. We're entitled to our individual opinions. We'll see who prevails on that point. You're carrying the resolution. I think you might want to take a second look at that to make sure if it has a problem, the problem is cured before we take final action. Nonetheless, and by the way, if you pay close attention to today's debate, you will be able to quiz out of the civics course conducted by our representative from Valley Center. This is a good debate. This is a good discussion. You can learn a lot if you listen closely to a lot of areas, first of which is the rules of the House, which we've covered. But let's talk about Article 5. This is Article 5 in its entirety. And I'll be referring to that in my next series of questions. And pardon me, Mr. Chairman, if I don't continue to ask for permission. Suffice it to say that I have a number of questions that I would appreciate the carrier responding to. My first one is, and this is, you all have heard of the W's, who, what, when, where, why, and H, how. But let's start with when. When will this convention occur, and who decides? When will this convention occur, and who decides when?
Yes, Congress is responsible for, they shall call a convention once 2/3 of the several states apply for a convention of states, and they shall name a time and a place.
And that was my next question as to where it will occur and who decides, and I believe the answer is, again, as in the first instance, Congress. What will the convention do, and who decides?
The resolution before you today, House Concurrent Resolution 5027, identifies 3 topics in which would be open for discussion. Is that what you're asking?
Kind of. I'm asking who decides. Is it Congress that decides what will be the business of the convention, or does the convention decide, or does a court subsequently decide?
Well, each state is sovereign, and each state is deciding which topics they want to agree to. Now, for the purposes of unification, in the terms of what we're calling a convention of states for, we've identified 3 topics in which we are filing an application for a convention of states. In terms of, so it is the states that are deciding the topics. It is also up to each state to develop a mechanism in which to nominate a delegation to such convention.
And what is your authority for that answer? Your legal authority for stating that it's the several states that decide what is discussed. I have in my hand, again, the entire language of Article 5, and I don't see anywhere in there that it says the states decide. On the application of the legislature of 2/3 of the several states, the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. I don't see any language that says certain amendments. I don't see any language that says designated amendments. I don't see any language that says limited to certain amendments. It says Congress shall call the convention for proposing amendments. 3 words. 3 words that outline what can be done at the convention. Now, calling your attention specifically to the questions and answers that were distributed, down on the first page, here's a description of what one of these conventions looks like. In the first paragraph, the last sentence, it says, the next to last paragraph, it says, voting at the convention is on a 1 vote per state basis. My question is, and I'm going to give ownership to you for this document, since it's got your name on it, and actually no one else's, doesn't say where it came from, other than the representative. My question is, what is your authority for saying voting at the convention is on a 1 vote per state basis?
At the bottom of the 1-pager I provided the members, it does provide a source, Robert Nadelson, Curing Federal Dysfunction by Constitutional Amendment, a primer, November 2014, the Independence Institute, Denver, Colorado. And then there's a website link.
In other words, it's this guy's opinion.
It is a scholar. Robert Nadelson is the preeminent scholar as it relates to Article 5 of the Constitution. He's done numerous research and on this, and he's based these findings on previous Supreme Court cases, and I'll leave it there.
And as you, I think, said in your opening remarks, we've never had an Article 5 convention. So any court cases that he may have been referring to are not court cases relating to Article 5. Would that be correct?
I got lost on your question. Can you repeat it, please?
Tell those guys to quit talking to you. My question is, this man who you're using as your source for saying 1 state, 1 vote, has not a single court case relative to a Article 5 convention on which to rely, because we never had an Article 5 convention for the courts to review, correct? I'm sorry.
Representatives, we do know that there have been over 40 interstate conventions that have successfully followed their rules and procedures without going rogue. I note that in the 1-pager. Interstate conventions have gathered to solve issues, maybe from more of a regional standpoint, whether it's the western states that got together to work on a water compact between the states. So there is some precedent. There's been over 40 interstate conventions.
Please pay close attention. These are important points. The source for the answer to the Article 5 convention, the source that he cited were state conventions. This is Article 5. If you haven't read it, it takes about 60 seconds to read it. There is nothing absolutely nothing in this amendment, in this section of our Constitution that says anything about one vote per state. That's made up. It's made up to make you believe that Kansas will have the same voting power as California, even though there are 3 million people in Kansas and 40 million in California. Congress, if 2/3 of the states apply, will be setting the requirements of the Convention of States. And do you really believe that the people in California, represented by their congresspeople, are going to stand for having one vote just the same as Kansas at any such convention? There's no way, politically, Congress is going to authorize any such convention. And it might be a little aggravating to Kansans to know that we're 5 times the size of Vermont, but Vermont would have the same vote. You might think a moment, representation in Vermont, something like a Democratic socialist is their U.S. senator. Delaware, we will have the same amount of votes as, under this theory, as Delaware, even though Kansas is 3 times the size of Delaware, and you know who comes from Delaware, don't you? I hope you do. Rhode Island will have the voting authority as Kansas, even though Kansas is 3 times the size. If you believe that the Convention of States will have one vote per state, I wish I had some land to sell you. That's one example of what I believe are total misrepresentations of this subject to get us to vote for it. Nonetheless, I do support the Convention of States. I just don't want to operate under misinformation when trying to convince somebody to support it. Now, as to content, and I referenced this earlier, it doesn't say anything about certain amendments, prescribed amendments. Congress sets the agenda before the convention is ever convened. Now, Representative, I have a question. The language of HCR 5027 talks about the scope of the federal government and its powers. And I believe I don't have it in front of me, but the idea is to limit the powers of the federal government. If at the convention, it was one of the delegates proposed that the right to an abortion shall not be abridged, hence a limitation on federal power, would that fit within the scope of this resolution? And if not, why not?
This resolution is not this proposed application is not a policy debate. This proposed application for a convention of states is about restoring the balance of power between the states and the federal government. In answering your previous question, it is the states that have to ratify any proposed amendments, whether it's Congress or a convention of states. States get one vote to ratify.
I get that. I'm not debating that point. It does, anything that's proposed from this convention must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And there's no time limitation on when they can do that. But you might have noticed a lack of response to my very specific and direct question. And I think the lack of an answer answers the question. And my question for a reminder is, if a delegate at this convention proposes an amendment to the Constitution that says the right to an abortion shall not be abridged, even under the theory that the topics are limited at this convention to what's in 5027, that fits very neatly into the definition of federal power. So those of you who are pro-life, keep that in mind. If someday you remember an ugly little man at the well saying, "I told you so," my 4 favorite words. If such a, quote, unlikely event would occur, understand there are a number of states in this country that don't necessarily prescribe politically to those values that are important to Kansans or agree with us on positions. The right to bear arms. We hold dearly our right to bear arms in the state of Kansas. And as my friend from Columbus accurately pointed out in his opposition to this amendment or this resolution, 2 justices of the United States Supreme Court have suggested that to modify our Second Amendment to restrict our right to bear arms, a proper method to do that is through a convention of states. 2 justices of the Supreme Court have suggested this very process to do that. For those of you who believe the right to bear arms is sacrosanct, keep that in mind if someday you remember a fat little guy at the well saying, "I told you so." Because across this country, I can tell you that in many states, the sanctity of the right to bear arms is looked at differently than it's looked at in the state of Kansas. I myself am excited about a convention of states because there are a number of places in the U.S. Constitution that I would like to see amended. And I happen to think that if Congress convenes a convention of states, it will be an opportunity for a number of those proposals, notwithstanding the language of this resolution. I'm not offering any amendments to this resolution because I don't think the actual language of it is that important. Because Article 5 doesn't require Congress pay any heed to the petitions. It simply says when they get 2/3 of the states requesting, they shall call a convention for proposing amendments. That's all it says. It is not limiting, and we cannot limit Congress in its powers that they exist today under Article 5. We can suggest, and I think that's what the resolution is doing, is suggesting some things, but it does not limit Congress to our suggestion. I'd like to see Citizens United, that infamous case that says if you're rich enough, you can buy politicians. I'd like to see that revisited, and I don't see this Supreme Court doing it, so I see a convention of states as a method to take care of that problem. I happen to support the decision in Roe v. Wade, but ever since that decision was issued, I thought that it was rather fragile in its legal authority. And that particular fragility is rising to the top of the political world today. So I think those of us who support Roe v. Wade would be much more comfortable if it was written into the Constitution, and a way to get that in front of people is through a convention of states. So I stand in strong support of this resolution, and I intend to vote for it. However, I do, returning to a previous point, feel it's currently defective. Thank you for listening.
To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Happy International Women's Day. I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
On page 1, following line 32, by inserting, be it further resolved, the majority of Kansas delegates to the convention of the state shall be women.
Representative, you may explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment simply guarantees that women will be included in the sequel.
Does any member wish to speak to the amendment?
Oh.
Chair recognizes Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, Representative. Bringing this amendment, you just specifically outlined that women should be a big part of the Convention of States. What precipitated that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Historically, there has been a very specific demographic that has been able to influence and make our laws and create our systems, and a lot of women generations before me fought and in dangerous situations and put themselves out there to give me the opportunity to stand before you today. And we don't know when the Convention of States could happen. It could be soon, it could be years from now. And so as somebody who represents Kansans here in the legislature, I would like to do what I can to pave the way for women to continue to have their voices heard in our government.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Representative Arnberger. Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the intent behind this amendment, but realistically, when I ran for the legislature, I didn't win because I was a female. I won because I worked hard. So I don't think that this is needed. I have full confidence that those who will be selected will be the most qualified individuals to go to this convention. So with that, I do not deem this as a friendly amendment and ask that we keep this resolution as is.
Chair recognizes Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in opposition to this amendment. Discrimination on the basis of sex is wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speak to the amendment, Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. Women are people.
There's no further discussion. Representative Hoy, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Work. I close and move my amendment.
Heard the motion to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. The nays appear to have it. Division's been called. Clerk, seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Clerk will open the roll and you may cast your vote. The roll is still open. Walk faster. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Representative Eric Smith votes no. Not seeing any other changes, with 35 in favor, 84 against, and 1 present. The nays have it. Motion fails. We're back on the bill. To speak to the bill, the chair recognizes Representative Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can you hear me now? I came down here to talk about this. You know, this is a serious issue, and this resolution's been here since I've been here, and that's 10 years. It's a long time. It is a very serious issue, and it deserves a serious debate. I don't know how many of you know, but we've already have 5 active resolutions to petition Congress for a convention. They go back as far as 1909, and the first one was like direct selection of senators, going back to the way we all had it. And the last one we had was in 1983, and it was about a balanced budget amendment. Remember, that's probably the one that's come the closest. I think it came within 2 states of having enough to ratify it. I appreciate and understand what the proponents of this resolution are trying to do. But I have been in opposition since before I've been in office, since I first heard of the Convention of States. And people ask me why. And I've been telling you for 10 years why. And it's like I'm blue in the face telling you why I'm against it. Previous representative from Shawnee County, he pretty much spelled out the truth of the matter, the way things really are. We don't agree a lot on things most of the time, but I will agree with him on these. Everything he said on there was fact. There are no procedures, there are nothing. The only thing Article 5 says is that the states can petition for one, and Congress has to do it if the correct number of states. Come on, there's nothing else. Spoiler alert, there's a bill coming through the House and committees here shortly that will deal with delegate selection. But I'm gonna tell you something. You look at Article 5 and you tell me, show me one space in there where it tells how delegates are gonna be selected. If you look in there and you look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States, it says all laws will be made by Congress. So you're petitioning to Congress. Congress sets a date. I can only assume that Congress will be the one making the laws, making up the rules, setting the number of delegates. As I mentioned before, in '83, when we came within 2 states of having enough states to petition, there were 41 bills introduced in Congress dealing with how to run and manage and delegate an Article 5 convention. They've already got the plan set up, and I'll guarantee you most of them were not one state, one vote. It was going to be based on kind of like an electoral college and populations. Folks, I just have to say that I'm not changing my mind on this. This is serious business. It's so serious that the state of Kansas in '74, I believe it was, came across and made their voice known that by amending the Constitution to make it read that you will require 2/3 of majority vote of both houses, as House and Senate, before passage of a resolution calling for an Article 5 convention. Those words are there. A 5th grade comprehension in English is all you need to understand what's said. I have an amendment, and you know how many amendments I brought down this well since I've been here 10 years? I think this might be number 3, maybe 4, but I guarantee you it ain't no more than 4. I don't do this lightly. I don't take this resolution lightly. I think it's a dangerous move, but I have an amendment, and it wasn't brought on by rules, which you may want to pay attention to what previous representatives said in his talk down here at the well. I just thought that if it was important enough for the people of the state of Kansas to change our Constitution in order to make it clear what it will take to change the Constitution of the United States, that it should be included in this resolution. And with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 1, following line 14 by inserting. Whereas Section 13 of Article 2 of the Constitution of the State of Kansas requires a 2/3 vote of each House voting in the affirmative to ratify any amendment to the Constitution of the United States or to make any application for Congress to call a convention of the states for proposed amendments to the Constitution of the United States.
Representative Hauser, you may proceed.
Pretty simple. All I'm doing is putting in what Kansas Constitution says about what was voted on by the people of the state of Kansas, so it is the will of the people of the state of Kansas. They're the ones that hold the power. So I'll stand for questions at this time.
Is there discussion on the amendment? Chair recognizes Representative Howe.
Had a question for the carrier of the amendment. Is this the same proposed amendment that was offered in committee?
Verbatim.
Thank you. Body, this amendment was offered in committee. It was given some consideration, but ultimately it didn't pass. So I'd ask that you oppose the amendment.
On the amendment, the chair recognizes Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask the carrier of the amendment if he agrees with the Attorney General that this language in the Constitution is precatory.
Well, Representative, I don't really know what that word means. I'm just a country boy. But I will say this. I was dismayed that we were talking about House rules and looking at that. And I'm glad you brought that point up earlier because that is a good point. But it dismays me how people can lose sight of the big picture, whereas the Constitution is the law of the land. And we, the people, wrote that Constitution. The people did. And when it says, well, we're gonna abide by the rule, House rule, blah, 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 I don't even remember what it was. You know what that does? That puts the will of this body ahead of the will of the people of the state of Kansas. You know, and that is wrong. Constitution of the state of Kansas created this body. It created our jobs. It created the Senate. It created everything. The creature of that creation cannot be greater than the creator of that, which is the people of the state of Kansas. That's how I'm going to answer my question on that, and I can't even remember where it goes. I start rambling.
Well, I very much respect a person who can admit when they don't know something. Before I looked it up this morning, I didn't know what it meant either. But it's important to know what that word does mean as it relates to this amendment. Precatory means the wish. So I do agree with the Attorney General in answer to my own question, based on a study of cases that he cited, and not going to go into a long line of reasoning. It was like the opinion was 9 pages long, but having read it carefully today, even though it sounds odd to us, I do agree with the Attorney General that this language is precatory based on case precedent. Nonetheless, the meaning of precatory means it's the wish of the people. Our Constitution says that it is the wish of the people that it be by a 2/3 vote. Now, it's somewhat moot because our rules also require a 2/3 vote. But this amendment that is being offered does nothing to damage this resolution. It simply restates what's in the Constitution, the precatory language that it is the wish of the people that it be by a 2/3 vote. And frankly, I don't understand the reasoning or the logic behind opposing this amendment that merely reflects what's in the Constitution as the wish of the people of Kansas, and I support the amendment.
Chair recognizes Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment. You know, the 2/3 issue has been a big deal for me. You know, I haven't agreed with the efforts in the past to try to pass the resolution with just a majority vote. I do think it needs to require a 2/3 vote. I don't necessarily think, you know, that it should, because I'd be in favor of amending the Constitution to require just a majority vote, because that's how most states do it. But as long as the state constitution requires a 2/3 vote, then I do think that we need to abide by that, unless we were to actually amend the Kansas Constitution to make it a majority vote. And there's some people who oppose this amendment on the basis that it's not necessary because we're already requiring a 2/3 majority, but we're only requiring that in the House. We don't know for sure what the Senate is going to do because the Senate doesn't have those rules. And so basically what this amendment would do is it would bind the Senate and make it to where the Senate would also have to pass it with a 2/3 majority vote as well. And so that's why I support this amendment. I did talk to the Convention of States people about this, and they did say that they were not going to pressure or push the Senate to try to pass it with a majority vote like they did in the past. However, it is possible the Senate leadership could just decide on their own to try to pass it with just a majority vote instead of a 2/3. And so I do think it would be a good idea to pass this amendment in order to require a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No further discussion. Representative Hauser, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, to close, I'm going to say, hey, this is a very important resolution. This is a very important vote. And once again, I'm not going to stand here and waste a lot of your time, because I know a lot of you have already made up your minds one way or the other. This bill has a lot of, resolution has a lot of sponsors. Some of them are in high places. But it doesn't mean I oppose it. It doesn't mean I can't oppose it. I still feel that it's not set in stone. There can be a runaway. Previous employer of Shawnee County spelled it out pretty clearly, where there are no rules. There are no delegate selections set yet. For all you know, I don't even know how it's for we the people supposed to be the claim, but $100 to a donut, so you're going to end up with a bunch of lawyers and like that on the delegate committee. But anyway, with that, I'm going to close on my amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Heard the motion by Representative Hauser to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Not seeing 15 hands, a roll call is not in order. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Every member had the opportunity to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Representative Elmer votes yes. Any other members wish to change their vote? Representative Wolf Moore votes yes. Any other members wishing to change their vote? If not, 64 in favor, 53 against. The ayes have it, motion passes. Back on the bill. Speak to the bill, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will keep this brief. I rise in strong support of HCR 5027. An Article 5 convention is a tool the framers of our Constitution put in our toolbox. It is a hammer. It is a big hammer, capable of doing great good and as such, potentially great harm if used improperly. It should be difficult to get this tool out of the toolbox. Clearly, that is the case. But now, for the first time in our country's history, we stand on the precipice of being able to take that hammer out of the box and use it for good. I say the time has come to join the 18 other states, hopefully on the way to 34, calling for an application for an Article 5 convention. I understand that, and I believe that there is some fear on some people's part about doing this. I get that, and I think by and large these are people of goodwill. We just happen to have a disagreement. I believe the people who are opposed to this want what they think is best for Kansas and the country. So knowing that fear exists, I will close with the most oft-repeated commandment in the Bible. Do not be afraid.
Chair recognizes Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Body, I rise in support of 5027. I want to think back a little bit on one of my favorite founders, Thomas Jefferson. It was said that President Kennedy one time had a great gathering of minds in attendance in the White House one time. And his comment was that this has been the greatest gathering of minds in the White House in the history of this country, except for when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. He was held in quite high esteem, and I hold him in quite high esteem. In 1823, Justice William Johnson wrote Thomas Jefferson. He was concerned about the direction of the Supreme Court. So you think back in 1823, they were concerned about it. And there's nobody on either side of the aisle here that doesn't think the Supreme Court gets it wrong pretty often. So the bottom line is he asked him, what do you think? What's your opinion? And Jefferson answered him in 1823 in response to a couple of cases in particular, Marbury v. Madison, as well as Cohen's v. Virginia. He says, you asked me to examine whether the Supreme Court has advanced beyond its constitutional limits and trespassed on the state authorities. I think we know that that happens even more so now, 150 years later. He says the practice of Judge Marshall of traveling outside his case to prescribe what law would be in most cases not before the court is very irregular and censorable. He says it's impossible to lay down a general formula to which words can guide. But he said there's two things that are important. The capital and leading object of the Constitution was to leave with the states all authorities which respected their own citizens only, and to transfer to the U.S. those which respected citizens of foreign and other states. And number two, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one which was passed. Let us try Cohen's case by these canons only, referring always to the full argument and to the essays before cited. He concludes in his letter, this is a rather lengthy letter, but he concludes in his letter, he says, the Chief Justice says there must be an ultimate arbiter somewhere. And that's true, there must. But it does not prove that it is either party. The ultimate arbiter is the people of the Union, assembled by their deputies in convention at the call of Congress or 2/3 of the states. Let them decide which they meant to give authority claimed by the two of their organs. And it has been the peculiar wisdom and felicity of our Constitution to have provided this peaceable appeal where that of other nations is at once to force. I leave this with you, and I support the resolution. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Bergquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have the privilege in this body, and I think probably in the Senate as well, from day to day or from time to time, to have visiting pages, young people with a desire to be involved in their government, or just a desire to do something different and to experience something new. We have at least a couple of them here today. that are about the same age when I got the same kind of passion that maybe they have in their hearts as well. And that is to know a little bit more about why we're here and why we're a government, why we're a nation, and why we have civil government. And when I was about their age, I thought how exciting it would be if I could be a part for a lifetime of a civil government. I thought about being civil to people and about communicating with people so that they would understand a passion of interaction and relation. We have a relationship in this country that started a long time ago. For some that have been here as a people for hundreds and hundreds of years, and some people that have been here for, as a people group for a couple of 150 or so. In 1876, a group of people came together as 13 different colonies, and they worked and worked to come up with a civil form of answer to a government that had already been way too oppressive for the people to endure. And so with that endurance and with some wording worked over a long period of time, a declaration was made so that they could make their grievances known to the government that was over them. For 150 or 200 years, they had endured more or less the oppression or the blessing of government. And at this time, they were ready to make a declaration as 13 individual colonies, 13 individual governments, 13 individual groups of people that came together and assembled a declaration. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, instituting new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed shall dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to alter the forms to which they've become accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, deriving invariably the same object, events are designed to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to organize new forms for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. That group of 13 colonies addressed the entire world with their grievances and addressed them to help them address these issues. Those people had already gone through a great amount of grievance to the point that they were having to separate themselves from this form of government. Those same 13 colonies and a few more people got together over the next dozen years and formulated a constitution for one reason, so that they would not have to do this again, so they wouldn't have to have a revolution, so they wouldn't have to totally throw off their former associations. They had to throw off family, and they had to throw off nations that they were a part of before. I feel it's such a great privilege to be a part of a nation that, at the risk of some of the concerns we've had here today, at that kind of a risk, that we would take the measures to deliberate beyond the point we are now, because believe me, I believe we're in a terrible shape right now, and I know some of you do too. But right now we have opportunity to take a convention of states, the other measure we have to deliberate with each other in this body or in 49 other bodies, to discuss how we can make our government better and bring it back to civility. And with that civility, I believe we have a great opportunity to practice good government. This concern that was given by the Representative Shawnee, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution. But I think what is, there's a comma. It's a really big comma, or, and then another comma after the or the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments. There's two options there. We have worked so hard, and God has provided such great provision for us in this nation that we don't have anything to think that we haven't had great opportunity to be a nation, and we still can be. But I think we're in a terrible way right now, and I think that a convention of states could be a measure that brings attention to the fact that we need to come back together. Civility is a good thing. This nation is a blessing, and I believe it's worth fighting for. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the bringer of the bill stand for a question, sir? Representative, do we need to have an application or petition properly completed and filled out and submitted in order to go to a convention of states?
Yes, Representative, we do need to put together a resolution, an application, which you will find in HCR 5027. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. That's good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of House Concurrent Resolution 5027. I would like to gently remind our body that Kansas law actually allows for the calling of a special session by way of two mechanisms. Number one, either the governor can call us back into special session, which Governor Kelly did at the top of the pandemic, if you recall, or the Kansas legislature, upon achieving that 2/3 majority of the members' signatures on a petition, can in effect activate that same process. Once achieved by the legislature, the governor then calls that petition-supported special session because we give the petition to her. The agenda for the special session is set by those who are petitioning, as we saw very recently, and leadership worked to maintain that scope of work once we were convened, just like we did the week of November 22nd, 2021. And as we signed that petition to deliver to the governor, as we convened to do that targeted work that was necessary and proper to answer the calls and the concerns of our constituents, and just as we addressed the pressing issues of life and livelihood, of liberty and freedom for our citizens, and just as we resolved to protect and magnify the voices of our citizens with well-reasoned, constitutionally aligned, and legally protected solutions. I therefore ask each of you who courageously activated our constitutional mechanism here in Kansas, did we cancel? Did we destroy? Did we reinvent the Kansas Constitution in that constitutionally prescribed special session? God forbid we did not. And our great Kansas, look around, still stands. And it's even stronger than before because of what you did. The parallels, while not exact, between the processes of Kansas legislature petitioning for special session and that same Kansas legislature petitioning for an Article 5 convention are abundantly clear. In both, we employ constitutionally provided tools to help us deliver relief to our citizens. In both, we achieve a 2/3 majority threshold necessary to complete the petition and deliver it to the proper authority, who, without our petition, on behalf of our constituents, could ignore the cries of the citizens that we serve. In both, the scope of work is predetermined for that discussion, and it is subject to follow-on high vote thresholds in order to achieve final approval or ratification. And the end result of both is a stronger state and nation where our citizens actually are heard, regardless of their viewpoint, regardless of their political stripes, regardless of their location. Today you have heard, or you will hear, maybe I'm the last one, I don't know, a gamut of slick straw man arguments on abortion or the 2A, emailed into our great state from outside of our great state, and designed to make you tremble in fear, tremble in uncertainty, tremble in aversion. But here's what's real. My voters, your voters, our families, they're being bludgeoned right now in their pocketbooks and at their kitchen tables and in their wallets by the horrible effects of an asinine domestic and foreign policy agenda. They are getting neither the relief they seek nor the line backing that they deserve from some of the very officials that they hired and sent to Washington to do just that. The good people of Kansas hired us, ladies and gentlemen, and sent us here to handle that work for their families when DC fails to hear them. Many use the term patriots to describe us when we were trying to achieve the special session. We tried to achieve that petition for that special session, I should say. I ask you to let us rise right now on this occasion to courageously reclaim that title once again by achieving the petition for the Convention of States. It falls to us at this time, in this moment, to stand and meet this mission. I will vote for HCR 5027, and it is my most sincere encouragement that you all do the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Representative Arnberger, blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say thank you to my representative, or my good friend, Representative from Shawnee, for bringing that Rule 2901 to our attention. So with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 1, following line 5, by inserting, be it resolved by the legislature of the state of Kansas, 2/3 of the members elected or appointed and qualified to the House of Representatives, and 2/3 of the members elected or appointed and qualified to the Senate concurring therein.
Representative, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did not have it in front of me by the time the representative from Cherokee had his amendment going. If you look at the amendment that representative brought forward, it does not fix the issue that the representative from Shawnee addressed. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Arnberger, blue, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
Heard the motion, all in favor. The motion to amend by Representative Arnberger, blue. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We're back on the bill. Chair recognizes Representative Susan Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone's been correct when they said that, or have been using the quote of all men are created equal. They were really only talking about men. You all know that. Just don't lie about that. We all know that they were only talking about men. And we were only talking about white men. Because anyone else, women, and especially people of color, were not allowed to take part in this. But we have all worked together with this great country to bring it to where it is now. And I don't know why we want to mess with the Constitution. However, it seems like this is going to continue. And the fact is that women and people of color, whether women or men, we always have to pretty much barge our way in to get any kind of attention or to be listened to or to get any kind of changes done. And many times we have to fight for our own life to exist. So with that, I have an amendment.
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 1, following line 32 by inserting, be it further resolved, the Kansas delegation to the Convention of the States shall include a current or former member of the Kansas House of Representatives or the Kansas Senate who identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer.
Representative, you may continue.
It is very short, very clear. Like I said,
Representative, hold on 1 second. Did you submit your amendment to the clerk? Give us just 1 second. Okay, we're good. Please continue.
Like I said, in order for some of us to be at the table, we have to open the doors for ourselves. So this is what this amendment does.
Does any member desire to speak to the amendment? Representative Howe?
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the consideration that's gone into all of the amendments today. However, it's not necessary to be specific on this resolution. We've identified 3 topics that we want to call a convention of states about, and we've been pretty clear about that. If it is the will of the body and of the Senate to call a convention of the states, it is then upon us as a legislative body to decide what mechanism and how to nominate delegates to that convention. So I believe this is premature to get into the discussion on the specifics of who, and I would ask you to oppose.
There's no further discussion. Representative Ruiz, you may close.
I close.
Heard the motion to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? No. Nays appear to have it. Division's been called. The clerk will open the roll and you may vote. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. As every member had the opportunity to vote, the clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Not. 33 in favor, 83 against. The motion fails. We're back on the bill. Speak to the bill, Representative Hauser, for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't plan on coming down here twice. I don't like coming down here at all, but here I am. I was moved to by remarks from a previous representative talking about special sessions and this and that, and how nothing can happen. I don't know how many of you recall 2019 session when we Republicans thought we had everything under control, and voila, using House procedure and the number of votes, we had Medicaid expansion bill introduced right here on this floor, and I thought I'd never see that happen. Kudos to you guys for pulling that off. I'm gonna say something. Y'all ain't gonna be delegates. Maybe somebody might be a delegate. You know, one of you few lucky chosen ones may end up as a delegate. But when them delegates get together, they are the convention. They're not bound by any rules that we're gonna set for them. They can do the same thing. If you have parliamentary and procedure and you have their number of votes, you can do whatever you want. How many times have we changed the rules? How many times have we suspend the rules? How many times do we go into emergency session and do this and that? And a lot. If we can do that in the Kansas State House, they can damn well do it in the delegate convention. And you know, I have to bring this up too. It was brought up very early in the discussion that this is an Article 5 convention. This is not a constitutional convention. What are you doing? You're going in and you're changing the Constitution. It doesn't matter what you call it. A constitutional convention is a constitutional convention made to alter the Constitution. So once again, I'm going to ask you all to vote no on this bill, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to let you all in on kind of a secret, might scare you, might cause you some concern. There is, as we speak, a body capable of suggesting amendments in office right now. It's called the federal legislature. For those of you who didn't pick up on that, I didn't give it away with a facial expression. Requires 2/3 of the House, which is determined by population, and 2/3 of the Senate, that's based on one state, one vote. That body's in existence right now. At any moment, amendments can be suggested. The Convention of States, the Article 5 Convention, is simply another body, and it's a body of the states. When we were drafting the Constitution, I was very young at the time, all right? But in 1787, when this topic was being brought up, we were discussing the Constitution as we were drafting it, as they were drafting it. Like I said, I was young. I just took notes. You know. Exactly. But as we were drafting this, the founders said, you know, this is pretty good, but we're not sure it's going to be perfect forever. There might be some changes that need to be made. We might want to pass some amendments to this Constitution. How will we go about that? So, well, we'll just recommend 2/3 of the body and of the legislatures, and by golly, we're good to go. And then I'm pretty sure it was George Mason. We just called him George. But I'm pretty sure George Mason is the one who stood up and said, okay, all right, I think this is a good idea as far as being able to amend the Constitution, but what happens if the federal government gets out of control? Surely they're not going to pass amendments to limit themselves. And everyone said, oh, yeah, you're right. He said, we need a mechanism for the states to also be able to propose amendments. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about passing amendments. We're not talking about forcing them upon the states. There still has to be the ratification process, the same one that we have in place for the federal legislature to pass an amendment. But everyone just kind of looked at George and said, yeah, you're right. No debate. There was no argument. There was no objection. And it was a unanimous vote. It just makes sense. Our government is based on checks and balances. Government can't check itself, then it's up to the states to do so. And that's absolutely natural. That's the way this thing is designed from the beginning. So I've heard a number of horror stories about what could come out of a convention, and I can't tell you that's a lie. I can't. As a previous speaker said, this is a big hammer. And it can be used for good, or it can be used incorrectly. But it's absolutely part of the process. It's the way our Constitution was designed. It's designed to be flexible, but difficult to change. We're advocating a convention to suggest, to recommend amendments to our Constitution. Still have to go through the same process. They have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, or else they don't take effect. We know how hard that is. Some of the most common sense amendments through the years have died for lack of adoption by 3/4 of the states. It's supposed to be hard, but we are absolutely not supposed to alienate ourselves from the process. The states created the federal government. We can't alienate ourselves from that process. So in case you didn't pick up on this, I'll absolutely be supporting HCR 5027, and I urge your support as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of concurrent resolution 5027. As many of you know, I ran for Congress previously unsuccessfully, and thank God that I'm in this body and not there. There are 3 remedies I see to fixing the current impasse in Washington. One would be, as you heard from the previous speaker, for Congress to fix itself. But having spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., I just don't think the will is there. And when I spend time there, I sense the frustration of many members that they just can't get it right because of special interests, the effect of money. Our voters can fix it, and many of my colleagues here have said to me, the voters can fix it. But unfortunately, because of the power of incumbency, I don't see that happening. I'm a convert to Convention of States. I shared your concerns until I realized this is the only remedy to fix Washington, D.C. I refuse to leave to my children trillions of dollars of debt, and I don't see it decreasing. It's already at 30, as many of you know. I think the only way to fix Congress, to fix our federal government, is to have a Convention of States, to be bold, as you heard from my colleague from Salina, to not be afraid. And I'd encourage you to support this resolution. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Eric Smith.
I'll try to make this quick, buddy. I've actually looked at this for nearly 8 years. Before I came in here, that was the reason I came up to Topeka, to talk to legislators about an Article 5. That was my thing. I ended up getting recruited. I had a couple other words I was going to use there, to come into the legislature. But the whole idea that I had at that time, I spent a lot of time on midnights working patrol and listening to talk radio. And an idea came out of it from a certain talk show host about an Article 5 convention. And I thought, well, finally, somebody has an answer for what's going on. You know, looking back, and the good representative from Gardner was speaking about Colonel George Mason, who did actually suggest that this be put in. He was an anti-federalist. He helped draft the Constitution, but he didn't like the fact, and neither did any of the anti-federalists, the fact that it gave the federal government so much power. And by the way, we were saying at that time, we're not going to put the Bill of Rights in there. The Constitution came out without a Bill of Rights. So Colonel George Mason said, I ain't signing that. He didn't. He didn't sign it. And the opponent in committee pointed out that he didn't sign that. Well, he didn't sign it because of that, but he also made two predictions. One was that, well, he made one big prediction. That was that the judiciary was going to overwhelm the authority of the states. What's happened, right? That's exactly what's happened. And then the other thing was, he said 2 days before the end of the convention, if you don't put a clawback in there for the states, this thing's going to turn into a monarchy. The president has too much power. It's going to turn into a monarchy. He's going to be able to write executive orders. He didn't use those words, but that's basically what he was getting at. And the states aren't going to have a say-so. So they put this in Article 5 that gave the states an ability. It's the only clawback that they gave us, and here we sit. By the way, they thought this would happen over and over. If you read the Federalist Papers, they thought a convention of states would happen several times. And it hasn't. The threat has been there, but it hasn't actually occurred. Our founding fathers had a plan, and this was part of it. And here we are scared to death to do the one thing the state legislatures were given the authority to do. The people depend on us. I get emails all the time as if somehow I'm going to vote on a federal resolution or somehow I'm going to go after federal programs. I don't have that ability, but I do have the ability that was given me under Article 5. If you don't think the Constitution is being changed, I've been going through here looking at we all get these supplements at the beginning of our session, right? Big box comes in with the supplements to all the laws that have changed. Well, additionally, is changes made to the Constitution through interpretation by our courts. Who is supposed to oversee that? Who is supposed to look at that? Who's supposed to be the checks and balances on that? If not that portion of Article 5, then what? And I'm going to challenge you. One, I want you to support this, but I'm going to challenge you to ask those that are against it, what is their answer? What is their answer if not that? I stand in support, and I ask you to. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Auerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So several years on Fed and State, got to hear this debate many times, heard a lot of opinions, and there seems to be experts on both sides of the discussion with a lot of differing ideas on what this all means. So just if I can focus on just one point, there was a question brought up earlier about who goes to the convention, who makes that decision, how many from each state. And there's a very clear statement on our desk that says one vote for one state. Like, okay, that's really neat. Whose opinion is that? It's somebody's opinion. So there's a document, it's the Congressional Research Service. This is, from what I can understand, it's the research department for our U.S. Congress. 2014, they wrote, the Article 5 Convention to propose constitutional amendments, contemporary issues for Congress. It's a 40-page document that kind of goes through all the research on this issue. At a very interesting statement, they said, while the Constitution is silent on the mechanics of an Article 5 convention, Congress has traditionally laid claim to broad responsibilities in connection with a convention, including receiving, judging, and recording state applications, establishing procedures to summon a convention, setting the amount of time allocated to its deliberations. And number 4, this is kind of the interesting one, determining the number and selection process for its delegates. Number 5 is setting internal convention procedures, including formulae for allocation of votes among the states, and then arranging the formula transmission for any proposed amendments to the states. Later on in the document, they kind of review several ideas that have already been floated around through Congress. It said one issue would likely arise over the state's representation formula at an Article 5 convention. As noted earlier, the most widely discussed model would establish a convention including 535 or 538, depending on whether the District of Columbia is included, delegates allocated to each state according to the size of its electoral college delegation. There's a lot of confusion on the issue, but after reading this document, I think it's wide open. There's good intentions, but there's a tremendous risk. Is the time now? Take a look around and see what's going on in society, the confusion. I don't think it is. I'm going to vote no, Mr. Chairman. I think our Constitution has served us well, especially over these past few years. I think if we do want to start, let's start here in Kansas. Let's put the effort into our budget, our expansion of programs and regulations, and our own term limits. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've listened carefully to all the speakers today, I don't think I've heard anybody say that DC is not in need of repair at the moment, and I think most of us agree with that. But what I haven't heard, I wanted to share 3 brief points on why I cannot support today's resolution. The first one was briefly mentioned earlier. It's Citizens United, a Supreme Court case that goes back to 2010. It allows essentially unlimited cash and influence of the wealthy and special interest to work in DC. And until we rein that in, that money will have dangerous roles in influencing both the amendments, votes on the amendments, and the convention itself. And nothing in HCR 5027 in its current form addresses campaign finance or its related problems. And instead, the resolution limits it and excludes it. The second one, in my opinion, term limits misses the mark a bit. To me, the problem is concentration of power at the top. And so it'd be term limits on leadership positions. But under the language of the resolution, that's also limited. Under the current structure, where our leaders in DC retain that power over and over, it results in top-down governance that increases the power of the influential special interest and others with money. And so to me, the solution should be term limits on leadership positions, but we're not allowed to address that at the convention under the language of this resolution. And then third and finally, if we're gonna do this as the nation watches us today, I've got texts from other people, friends across the country that are watching Kansas today. And if we're going to do it, it needs to be a united application. At a time when we're so divided right now in our country, Kansas, if we're going to act, let's act united. As I look at this, our carrier mentioned earlier e pluribus unum, kind of a similar concept. But as I look at the language itself, we've got 46 co-sponsors. All of them are Republican. And I find that troubling, not because it's not a good bill. It may very well be a good idea down below, but it gives the appearance to the outside world, and God knows what media can do with headlines, but it gives the appearance that we're not united and that we don't have any Democrats on board to support as we work through this and put it together. So I also looked at the history, and you look at the states that have approved it going back all the way to 2014. Georgia, Alaska, and Florida were the first ones to do it. All of these are red states, so it doesn't look like we've got a blue or red solution coming together to get a purple solution. So it's the third problem that I have with it. The unlimited time application so that it doesn't expire also is a problem. The people in my district have made it clear they want me to work in a bipartisan fashion to find solution. So until we fix those above problems, I can't support today's resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair recognizes Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I ask the carrier of the HCR for questions, I'd like to quote Daniel Webster. He said, "It is hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters." With this convention of states, or Article 5. I have to admit I'm a little confused on how we would even elect our delegates, who our delegates would be. Would it be somebody from the 2nd district of our congressional district, or the 3rd or the 4th? Would it be the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate, or maybe the governor? Would it be the person who's the most popular, wealthy individual who's been propped up by the Marxist media? I don't know. Who would it be? That's one of my questions. Who would represent me in all of this? We see a drastic shift in the demographics and philosophy and morality of our nation. What used to be right may now be wrong. What may have been wrong may now be right. We have major interpretations that differ on the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and we could list to the 27th. So with that, I do have a couple questions for the carrier of this HCR, if you'd please stand for questions. With this, on line 25, it says that we are trying to propose amendments to the Constitution of the United States that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. Tell me how that would look like.
Thank you for the question, Representative. I can't tell you what that looks like because we are just in the process of calling for a convention of states. It is upon 2/3 of the states, of the several states, calling a convention of states. It would be then where Congress shall call the convention of states in which those ideas can be considered. As mentioned before, I think a previous speaker mentioned there was a previous application for a convention of states regarding the balanced budget amendment.
Is there any proposal in writing that we can look up on the physical restraints that we're proposing in here? Are there any amendments? You said that 18 other states have passed this or calling for this. Is there any paper trail, or are we just to guess or to put good faith in government?
I'm not sure I understand your question. If you could maybe rephrase it or repeat it again.
Yes, sir, I will. Is there any amendments that are already drafted for this application?
I am not aware of specific amendments. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there in the United States that have conceived ideas of what they think should be considered if a convention of states were to be called, but that's their freedom to be involved in their government. And we don't have any of those, we didn't consider any of those in the Committee on Federal and State Affairs.
We also see fiscal restraints on federal government limit the power of the jurisdiction of the federal government. Tell me how that's going to work, because to limit the power, let me ask you or the body some questions. We're reminded, or the statement of Amendment 1, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Can we say with honesty that that has not happened here in the United States right now? We remember that with the COVID fiasco that churches were locked down. Parishioners weren't allowed to go to their houses of worship. We've seen the violation of the First Amendment, not only by the federal government, but by the state government. We want to talk about balanced budgets, but year after year after year, we vote on the higher budget of the previous year after year. So could you tell me or explain to me how or what it's going to look like to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government?
As I mentioned in my opening testimony, Article 3, Article 2, and Article 1 would be subject to amendment because those are the three branches of government. You have the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary branches of government. So there could be proposed amendments that deal with each of those specific branches of government. There was a mention earlier about Citizens United. The representative was upset and concerned about that Supreme Court ruling. So perhaps at a hypothetical convention of states, that issue could be addressed in a convention of states, but we will never know unless we call and apply for a convention of states.
Amendment 2, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's in our Constitution, correct? So has the right to bear arms ever been infringed, not only in the state of Kansas, but according to our federal government?
I think you know and I know, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but sure, there's been violations of our rights, whether it's the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and so on. But in order to secure these rights, Congress gave us Article 5 of the Constitution, which gives us, the states, the ability to serve as a check and balance in our system of government, in the system of federalism, that will allow us to address those grievances.
So if the federal government says, you know what, we're not going to honor the Second Amendment any longer, it's not up to the states to say, you know what, we actually are going to, and we're going to protect our Second Amendment liberties, and we're going to protect the rights of the people. I think with elections and term limits, how would a bill be, or an amendment to be introduced here on the House floor? We want the federal government to be limited in their terms and in their abilities. But what if we would introduce term limits here on the House floor and in the Senate to bring term limits here to begin to regulate our own House and our own spending in our own ways? I still haven't heard how we are going to propose those who are going to be delegates. How is this going to happen? Where's the checks and balances? How will we be able to call this individual or these individuals back in if they go rogue? What is the checks and balances? Where's the transparency?
Thank you. It's a very important question. It's up to each sovereign state to decide how they will nominate a delegation and appoint a commissioner to represent their state at a convention of states. Each sovereign state has that authority to do it. Now, do we have a set of parameters that we can work under right now? No, we don't. But I do know tomorrow in the House Committee on Federal and State Affairs, it was scheduled to have a hearing on a proposed trailer bill, if you will, that would start the conversation of what that may look like. And that conversation obviously involves amendments, suggestions, and the checks and balances in which we are entrusted here in the Kansas House.
Thank you for that. I guess I still have to wait for the answer of how we're going to elect or select delegates. I know that people are talking that this is our only option, and we talk about states' rights also, but I think also the states are guilty of allowing the federal government to grow. In so many terms, we've prostituted ourselves out to federal money. If we don't pass this, then we're not going to get federal money. We're not going to get this money. We're not going to get this. And we've allowed these shackles and chains to be placed upon us from the federal government. We talk about that the power belongs to the people, but I don't even know who's going to be the delegate for me. And I'm supposed to vote for this? I don't even know who's going to represent me. I don't even know the process yet, because there is no process yet. And we're called to vote on this. Government says, or this process is saying, trust me, just trust me. We don't have any paperwork. We don't have anything going on. We have nothing in concrete, but just trust me. That sounds like good policy with government. I will not be supporting this until I know more about this. I also have an amendment because I believe if we're going to do this, or if this body is going to pass this, then we need some checks and balances. So with that,
The amendment appears short. The clerk will read.
Page 1, line 32, after subject by inserting, except that if such event does not occur within 4 years from the date this application is approved by the legislature of the state of Kansas, this application shall expire and shall not constitute an application from the legislature of the state of Kansas under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States.
Representative Jacobs, you may continue.
what this simply does, it's a 4-year sunset. So if this does come out of this committee, that we have the ability to redress this again, because we're blindly going into a snowstorm right now.
Speak to the amendment, Representative Howe.
Thank you. I appreciate the carrier of the amendment and his intention behind it. A similar amendment was offered in committee, and it did not prevail. I would ask that you oppose that, and I will note that there are currently 18 states that have passed a application for a convention of states, just 3 this year: Wisconsin, Nebraska, which is a unicameral legislative body. They're elected in a nonpartisan way, correct? And most recently, West Virginia. It might take a year or 2, or maybe 3, or maybe 4, maybe 5 to get up to 34 states. At any point in time, this legislative body has the authority to rescind any application for a convention of states. So you already have that authority, and I don't think we need to put it into the resolution. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative Jacobs, you may close.
As the previous representative had said, there is already applications out there per the state of Kansas. This is going on forever and ever and ever. May come back, may go on until Christ comes back. We don't know, but it's going on. And times change. Again, we don't even have a playing field yet. We don't know how this is going to work out. So we're just going to pass it. We're going to go play ball without any rules. So I would actually like to see us have ground rules to see what's actually going to happen here. But I move my amendment.
Heard the motion by Representative Jacobs to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. Nays appear to have it. The nays do have it. Motion fails. We're back on the bill.
John Adams said this: "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Can we honestly say in this divided nation that it's a good idea right now to bring a convention of states or an Article 5? James Madison said this: "Having witnessed the difficulties and dangers experienced by the first convention, I would tremble for the result of the second." Many well-funded organizations are advocating for an Article 5. Where does the money come from? Who are the lobbyists? Where do they get the money for their materials? Where are the resources coming from? Where's the paper trail? What's the end game? We have 27 amendments, and our government says, you know what? Not today, Bob. We're not going to listen to it. So I do wholeheartedly oppose this because, again, there is no groundwork. There are no rules. We're just saying Article 5 tells us we can do it. We don't know how our delegates are going to be served. We don't know how many actual votes. We haven't even seen any amendments. It doesn't even make any sense. So with that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me The time.
Chair recognizes Representative Byers.
Mr. Chair, will the carrier of the resolution stand for questions? In the last 2 years, how many states have rescinded their applications for Convention of States?
I do not have that answer.
Body, both New Jersey and Colorado rescinded all their previous applications last year. I bring this up because, as has been said repeatedly, this comes up, states go, we're not going to do this, and back down. We look at the rules that are applied here and we realize how flexible they are. They are so flexible that the Equal Rights Amendment technically has been approved by enough states to be considered an amendment to the Constitution. Yet we don't really know for sure. I oppose this and I suggest that you do as well.
No further discussion. Representative Howe, you may close.
Well, body, I appreciate your indulgence today. I consider it a high honor to be able to carry this bill before you today. A lot of Kansans put a lot of sweat, a lot of groundwork into making this possible. And while we're quoting our favorite founding fathers, I would like to quote mine. President George Washington: "The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked, on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." I believe our founders knew what they were doing when they drafted the United States Constitution, including Article 5, which gives us a beautiful tool to use to be that check and balance to the federal government. Will we use it? I don't know. That's up to you, and you'll have to vote your districts. For 13 plus years, I had the high honor of working in both our nation's capital and in a district office for two different members of Congress from Kansas. When I first started on Capitol Hill in 2003, it was not too far after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan was in full swing. And it was just before the lead up to the war in Iraq, which was later known as Operation Iraqi Freedom. During that time, the national debt was $6.7 trillion, and the debt to GDP ratio was 59%. Compare that with today, where our national debt has surpassed $30 trillion this past January. And the debt to GDP ratio is over 124%, higher than it was after World War II. During that time, we've had two Republican presidents, two Democrat presidents, and both parties have controlled Congress at different points. Campaign promises are made and broken, and the American people are often left feeling jaded and powerless, like nothing will ever change, no matter who they send to Congress. Talking about a runaway convention. Well, we have a Congress that tends to run away from problems and solving them. And that is it's incumbent upon us as states to push back. What will you do in this critical hour? What can address this? Is there hope? Well, I certainly believe so. If not, I would not be standing here before you today. That hope lies with you in your vote on Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Will you use it or not? Mr. Chair, I move when the committee rises and report House Concurrent Resolution 5027 favorably for passage.
Heard the motion by Representative Howe to report HCR 5027 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. No. The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. Clerk will open the roll. You may vote. Seeing 15 hands, a roll call is in order. Has every member had the opportunity to vote? Clerk will close the roll. Does any member wish to change their vote? Seeing none, 78 in favor, 42 against, the motion passes. The clerk will record the vote. Recognize the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we rise and report.
Heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes.
Clerk will read the committee report.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of the Whole recommends House Bill 2548 be passed as amended, House Concurrent Resolution 5027 be adopted as amended.
Well, you have just been watching a special edition of COS Live where we've been live streaming the Kansas House of Representatives as they held a quite lengthy debate today on the Convention of States resolution. The vote that you just saw was the vote for cloture. So that moves the resolution forward to the next stage. It was a successful vote. I didn't quite get down the number, but it was a large margin to vote for cloture of the resolution. That means we expect the final vote in the resolution of the Kansas House of Representatives to happen tomorrow. So I hope that we'll be able to live stream again. Just to give you a quick recap, one of our sponsors in Kansas there introduced the resolution. He was the one you saw talking about it first, and then he did the closing there at the end. That's Representative Howe. And he really implored his colleagues in the Kansas House to use their constitutional power to protect we the people from continued federal overreach and out of control federal spending. He pointed out that Article 5 merely gives the states the same power as Congress already has to propose constitutional amendments, but to propose the kind of amendments that Congress will never propose because they are amendments that will in fact limit and restrict the power of Congress. He also pointed out, and you heard this echoed in several other legislators' statements today, that the vast majority of opposition emails that are being received in the Kansas House are from out of state. And yet they're receiving loads and loads of supportive emails from Kansans who are wanting their state legislature to use its constitutional power under Article 5 to restrain the federal government and put it back in its constitutional box. One other thing I wanted to note, just as a matter of procedure, in case you missed our introduction at the beginning of this floor session, the Kansas Constitution does impose a supermajority vote on the legislature in order to apply for an Article 5 convention. If you were listening to the debate, you heard them refer to an attorney general opinion, and that was a Kansas attorney general opinion that found that, in fact, that constitutional supermajority requirement is invalid because Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution places the power to apply for an Article 5 convention squarely in the hands of the state legislature itself. So it's not a power that can be changed or affected or altered in any way by the other institutions in Kansas. It's purely given to the legislature itself. However, the little wrinkle here is that the Kansas legislature has its own rules that also impose a supermajority requirement in order to apply for an Article 5 convention in Kansas. So the amendment that was successful that you saw them make today on the Kansas House floor was basically to incorporate a provision of the Kansas House rules that refer to that supermajority requirement. So in order to be successful in the Kansas House tomorrow, we will be required to achieve a supermajority vote of 2/3 of the Kansas House members. So if you're in Kansas, I hope you are contacting your representative and letting them know in no uncertain terms that you want them to support the Kansas Convention of States resolution. That's HCR 5027 there in Kansas. So this concludes our coverage of Kansas. We'll be bringing you to South Carolina right away. Look, we already have South Carolina up. We are expecting debate in the South Carolina Senate today. And because I've been talking to you, I'm not sure where they are on the calendar, but let's go straight to the South Carolina Senate and listen in.